It is important when carrying out front suspension checks that the vehicle is correctly jacked in accordance with the MOT testing manual. On this particular vehicle we can raise it on the jacking points to allow the wheels to hang freely, observing the suspension as it goes. We can now inspect the tyres and the rim on the inner edges for size, damage to the tyre, etc., making sure we carry out a full 360 degrees. We can now go ahead and lower the vehicle down to a suitable height for yourself, and then start by checking the under wheel arch components. Check the spring, check the damper, make sure you check around the wheel arch itself because much of this will be prescribed area. On this particular example we can also see a brake pipe or part of a brake pipe and hose, so we can check that. And as well as checking the rest of the wheel for security, we can go ahead and poke through the wheel to check for braking components as well. The tyre is checked to be firmly seated on the rim, the outer sidewall checked, before turning the wheel out and carrying out a thorough check through 360 degrees to the tread of the tyre. Pay particular attention to any perishing, cuts, lumps, bulges, and of course legality of tread as well, using a tread depth gauge only when you feel it's necessary to report on a low tyre. You can now go ahead and check the drive shaft gaiter. As you rotate the wheel, part the pleats so you can check for any splits, and as you rotate the wheel, check the length of the drive shaft and the CV joint itself for bends and obviously roughness. Check the trap rod end dust cover for splits, as well as the lower ball joint, making sure as well that the trap rod end, ball joint and any other fixings are firmly in place and locked. You can also check the lower part of the McPherson strut. We can now concentrate on the part of the brake pipe we can see, including the ferrules, and then use a small pinch bar under the lower arm to check for lift of the lower ball joint itself. Be careful not to do any damage here. Now turn the wheel in the opposite direction and go ahead and check the lower ball joint. We can now place our bar under the lower ball joint, again taking great care not to damage the dust cover, and check for any lift. Depending upon the design of the vehicle now, there's probably other checks we can make under here, but pay particular attention around all of the suspension joints, brake hoses, etc. We can now go ahead and rock the wheel in the side to side position to check for steering free play, and from top to bottom to check for suspension free play, before rotating the wheel to check for roughness of the bearing, and then spinning it, listening for noisy bearings. We now go ahead and put a bar under the front wheel, and we're going to lift slightly upwards, and now we can check the top mount for any movement as well as any suspension attachment points behind the wheel. From the underneath of the vehicle, whilst our assistant is now rocking the wheel from side to side, we can go ahead and check the steering system components for free play, including the inner tie rod. We can also check the lower ball joints as the wheel is rocked from top to bottom, and any suspension attachment points at the same time. We'll also ask our assistant to put the bar under the wheel so that we can have a check of any top mount free play. And this is repeated on both sides, and then we can lower the vehicle down, again checking to make sure the suspension moves as necessary. Now, using an assistant, we're going to first locate our turn plates, bearing in mind that the wheel track increases slightly as the vehicle is rolled onto the turn plates, so this needs to be accounted for. And then roll the vehicle onto the turn plates and ensure it's chock so it can't move. Once it's correctly positioned, you're now going to grasp the tyre at the top. You're going to push and pull on the wheel now, feeling for any free play, grasping the tyre at 12 o'clock, and then repeating by grasping the tyre at 3 and 9 o'clock, again pushing and pulling to feel for any free play. You'll now repeat exactly the same on the opposite side of the vehicle, and this needs to be done long enough for you to determine whether there's any free play there. You'll now ask your assistant to repeat those same checks, initially grasping the tyre at 12 o'clock and pushing and pulling inwards while you observe the likes of the top mount, the strut attachment points. And it's a good idea to get your hands on as well so you can feel for any looseness or free play here. When your assistant grasps the wheel at 3 and 9 o'clock, you can then check the lower suspension attachment points, lower ball joint, etc. And again, this is repeated on the opposite side of the vehicle in just the same way. You can now go ahead and lower the ramp down. Ask your assistant to jump in, check it's in neutral, start the engine, and then raise it back to full working height. You're now going to ask your assistant to turn the steering wheel from full lock to full lock from both directions, checking the steering rack as it expands, as well as its security. We're also then going to check the tyres, front side and back edges for clearances, as well as any twist or pull on the brake hoses. And of course this is repeated on the opposite side of the vehicle, so again watching the rack gaiter expand, checking its security at both ends, parting the pleats to check for any splits, and go ahead and check those clearances of the front tyres again. Just be careful not to have your hand in position as the wheel's being turned in case you get your hand trapped. Okay, once we're happy with this, now we can go ahead and lower the ramp back down to the ground. And now we jump into the vehicle, and with the engine running we're going to turn it fully lock to lock, feeling for any roughness of the steering system. Obviously here I'm doing it with just one hand, you'd normally do it with two hands, so it's a lot more fluent. And then finally you'll need to turn it back to centre, turn the engine off, take the keys out of the ignition so that you can check for the operation of the steering lock.